Fox on top of two storms bearing down, one engulfing the capital, the other engulfing, well, the Gulf. This storm shutting down the government for a fourth straight day as lawmakers and the president can't seem to get it together. This storm shutting down oil platforms across the Gulf as it very rapidly comes together. The House Speaker today playing down reports of sniping with the president over their storm. Florida and Louisiana residents stocking up on anything they can get their hands on to get them through their storm. So much churning. Time for your world to get going. Welcome, everybody. I'm Neil Cavuto, and let's get ready to rumble because the country is getting it on two fronts for real. First, to that man-made storm, the one in Washington that ain't letting up.
When it comes to negotiations, I've said I am happy to have negotiations with the Republicans and Speaker Boehner on a whole range of issues. But we can't do it with a gun held to the head of the American people.
Well, this isn't some damn game. The American people don't want their government shut down, and neither do I.
Well, both sides say that, but neither doing much to avoid that. Let's just say we are not leaving it at that. We've got chat program on Capitol Hill in the eye of the political storm. Fox Business Network's Nicole Petalides of the New York Stock Exchange on the potential financial storm. The Wall Street Journal's Steve Moore on a new healthcare storm. And Rick Reichmuth on Karen, that other doozy of a storm. We begin with Chad. Chad, what's the latest now?
Well, the latest right now in the past hour or so, House Democrats are trying to work with a coalition of Republicans to use a little bit of a parliamentary maneuver here. It's called a discharge petition, where you can go over the head of the Speaker of the House, and if you can get 218 signatures on a clean bill, this would be a bill without any strings attached to reopen the government, you can go over the head of the Speaker and put this on the floor. Now, what that would entail, the Democrats have 200 members. It would entail all of them, and then pluck off 18 Republicans. Here's the problem with that, Neil. The rules of the House say that a discharge petition can only come up on the second and fourth Mondays of each month. Well, that gets us to the 14th of October, so that's probably dead in the water right now. The other thing that's going on is a lot of speaking and a lot of press conferences. In fact, Steny Hoyer, the Democratic whip, said just a few minutes ago at a press conference, ironically enough, that he wished that they would stop all the rhetoric, stop the press conferences. There's no negotiating right now. There's just a lot of posturing going on. In fact, there's more posturing going on than a Bikram yoga class, perhaps. It's just rhetoric and posturing.
That's an analogy that I really didn't want, but I can kind of see. Chad, thank you very much.
I can do downward dog or something.
I understand, my man. Thank you very much.
Namaste.
Chad, the guy is an encyclopedia, and thank goodness he's going to be joining us live tomorrow in special coverage on all of this. By the way, stocks up today, but down for the week, the second down week in a row. The shutdown now, the debt ceiling next. Is Wall Street nervous? Let's ask. Fox Business Network's Nicole Petalides, who I said is at the New York Stock Exchange, and my colleague and friend, Melissa Francis, as well. Melissa, that's the big worry, I guess, if this drags into something more substantive or more dangerous, an actual debt ceiling bugaboo, even a default. Then all bets are off, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, we joke about the government shutdown and how nobody's impacted by it. When you talk to serious people on Wall Street, they are worried about the debt ceiling. They do think that's the real debt breaker. I mean, if you watch Jack Lew in his interview with Liz Clayman on Fox Business earlier this week, I mean, he's turning out his pockets. He's like, I have no money. I've gotten to the end of the checkbook. The reorder slip isn't there on the bottom. We've got no money. We can't pay our bills.
I always like how he says we're down to our last $30 billion on October 17th.
Right.
Can't you look under another couch cushion?
I mean, at that rate, it lasts them about 3 seconds.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It is dire.
You know, Nicole, whether you buy Jack Lew's October 17th drop deadline date, the fact of the matter is that the markets have seen these sort of soap operas play out before. We should stress that even if they don't get a debt ceiling agreement by that time, you can still rob Peter to pay Paul and pay your most important obligations, including interest to bondholders, to avoid default. So hope springs eternal. That's what they'll do if it comes to that. But are they concerned that the default thing is looking more likely the closer we push to that deadline?
Every moment that passes, they know they're getting closer and closer to the key deadline on October 17th. So that's what you don't want. Ultimately, they want everybody in Congress to get get beyond the impasse and work it out. This could be very detrimental in all factors. You could see Treasury rates on the rise. You could see the dollar plummet. You could see equity markets pull back, economic activity slow down, which could even move us into recession. I've heard all scenarios, Neil, and none of them are pretty. Even the U.S. credit rating, right? You don't want to see a downgrade. And you may see the credit rating agencies actually looking at U.S. credits, even if we don't get to that date. The closer we get to that date, the quicker they may feel that it's a possibility to downgrade our AAA.
Yeah, well, and S&P was the last to do that 2 years ago. Right. It was the only firm to do that. But, you know.
And Fitch may.
Exactly. Now, it's interesting, Melissa, because obviously Congress would respond to a tantrum in the market, a big sell-off. Right. Just as the first TARP vote generated, after it didn't go anywhere, a nearly 800-point sell-off in the Dow, they quickly changed course and got a TARP rescue package together, only to see the Dow tumble thousands of points over the course of the next few months.
Right.
So is following the Dow's lead actually a wise idea?
No, of course it's not. But right now, I think that traders realize that they've got some time to buy before they have to throw a tantrum, or they're distracted by what's really going on. I mean, we heard about the Twitter IPO coming up, that renewed interest in the market. Potbelly was out with an IPO earlier today. We saw that stock almost 100%. Earnings season starts next week. So traders are focused on what's really going on in the market before they get back to throwing their tantrum, as you say, about what could happen with the debt ceiling. But, I mean, they'll still do it when the time comes.
When
they'll
the time
still find
comes.
time. Yeah.
Nicole, real quickly, do traders do an under and over with you about how likely they think any of this is to pass, or that this is all kabuki theater and it will pass?
Well, they always think it's political theater, but they were surprised when they didn't come to some sort of agreement. They again think that obviously that they will come to an agreement. And don't forget how this all snowballs. You have 800,000 employees furloughed. Those employees are not going to delis. They're not going to the parking car garage. Even down here on Wall Street, there was a parking garage owner who said he's already lost 50% of revenue. We're hearing one story after another. United Technologies won't be doing as much production, the contractors, because they don't have the people from the government to inspect those materials and items that United Technologies.
But I don't know if I buy that. I mean, the people who are furloughed are still eating. I mean, they're not starving to death, so they're still going out and spending money on food. I don't know how much of this is really material and really trickles down, or how much of it is belly aching.
And do you just delay what you're planning to spend, and once you get recouped and back at work, you know? But you don't know.
I mean, you don't know, and you asked about handicapping what's really going to happen. Morgan Stanley out with a report today saying they thought the chance of a default was 0. So there you go. There's one bet.
All right.
That's a positive one. I like
Ladies, thank you very, very much. He has a show to race
Neil.
to right after this. Don't forget that. In the meantime, to the health care fight. And this from Texas Republican Senator Ted Cruz.
I guess now the Democratic Party has become the party of Obamacare, by Obamacare, and for Obamacare all of the time. And every other priority recedes.
Anyway, it follows a series of amendments rejected by Senate Democrats, including one that would have delayed a medical device tax for 1 year, something Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid flatly rejected.
This proposal is a act of desperation from their standpoint. You can't do it. It involves tens of billions of dollars.
The Wall Street Journal's Steve Moore caught that and realized now you're concerned about cost. Steve, good to have you. What do you think of that?
Hey, Neil, you know, it's interesting. When you talk to Democrats privately, what they will tell you, and I've talked to many of them, is this is a dumb tax. We should have never done this in the first place. It's about innovation. Medical devices are critical to our healthcare industry. It's also about jobs, about some estimates 250,000 jobs that will be killed by this tax. So even Democrats, thoughtful Democrats, want to get rid of this tax. The problem is everything has become so political that you just can't get anything done, even things that both parties sense make a lot of sense.
You know, not to digress, Pam, these little promos we're doing for the new primetime begins, how did they get O'Reilly to do the little card flipping around thing? I could see the others, but O'Reilly? You know, it wasn't a moment like, here, Bill, hold this up. I don't know. I digress. I'm sorry. Steve, could I ask you something? When we get to this point in a heated debate, you look for any signs of progress.
Right.
And so I'm realizing now the president has gone and said, you know, I support this idea of making sure furloughed workers are ultimately paid. And I looked at that and I said, well, it's a little after the fact, but it's the one thing they agree on, the first hint of agreement. Could that lead to other agreements?
You know, here's the thing that's so strange about this situation. Really, the parties aren't that far apart. I mean, if Barack Obama got on the phone with John Boehner and said, look, offered him something, I think Republicans would say, okay, look, we'll negotiate on this. That's called the art of the deal, Neil. And that's something that every president that I've covered, from Ronald Reagan to George Bush to Bill Clinton, understood. This president, you know, it's pretty obvious, I think, that he really doesn't want a deal. He wants an unconditional surrender from Republicans. Now, the point he is making, Neil, is, look, I'll negotiate after we pass the debt ceiling and after we pass the budget. That's not the way it works. Once you pass the budget, once you pass the debt ceiling, there's no incentive for any kind of movement.
That's what Republicans fear. You know, your word is only as good as, well, your word. So we've said and promised a lot of things.
Every major budget agreement that we have had for the last 25 years, it's actually made, to the extent we've any progress on the deficit, it's because of the deals that are made in crises like this. If we don't get a deal now, my fear is, and I think the fear of a lot of Americans, we're just going to keep borrowing $500 billion to $1 trillion a year.
That won't change. Whatever we get, and we'll settle this eventually. I'm not smart enough to know when, but Steve, we'll settle it. But we will never, ever, at the rate we're going, get serious about this spending. That's just not happening. Unless,
well,
I don't know.
God, I mean, that is a depressing thing to say.
Well,
I think
I don't mean,
look, I think everybody outside of Washington
right
wants to.
Right.
I think Americans want to get serious about it. I don't think
you're right.
too many people in Washington do.
I think you're right, but we ought to do a little card to flip it around and say, get serious. I love that. That's so cool. All right, Steve, thank you. Then there's Karen.
You need one of those cards.
I do. Karen is on a tear, whipping up furious winds and worries in the Gulf of Mexico. We'll be talking to Florida's governor, who's preparing for the worst, to Rick Reichmuth, on this storm right now. Rick, how's it looking?
You know what? Overall, I mean, we've had such a quiet hurricane season, and we've got a storm we're going to deal with, but it's not going to be a blockbuster storm, and that's certainly good news. But if you're in the Central Gulf, you have to watch this. We still have hurricane watches in effect anywhere you see this orange, from around Destin, Florida, over throughout Plaquemines Parish, Louisiana. I do think in the next advisory coming out in the next hour, we could see some of that dropped, because I think we might be seeing a bit of a weaker storm. Now, the storm path, however, going right over where a lot of the oil platforms are, that obviously big concern. If you get a 50, 60 mile an hour storm, that it certainly will cause some disruption, but we will see it take a right-hand turn. If it takes it a little bit later, a little bit more of an impact than if it takes it a little bit earlier and farther off towards the right. This is what you're seeing on the satellite image. Infrared image, it looks kind of impressive when you see this, but when you take a look at the visible imagery, you kind of get a bit of a different story. There's the center of the storm, and you see all the activity off towards the east of it. When you see the center of the storm displaced from where the main activity is, that means we're not seeing an incredibly strong storm, and it would be very difficult for it to strengthen, at least in the short term, and we're just going to run out of time here. This is the official track of this storm. Eventually, by Monday, moving very quickly up towards the East Coast, we could deal with some flooding across parts of the East Coast by the time we get to Monday and Tuesday, with very heavy rainfall associated with this. But we'll see some areas likely 6, 7 inches of rain, maybe an isolated 10 inches of rain, and a storm surge around 3 to 4 feet in a few isolated cases as well. So, Neil, certainly a storm that they're going to watch, but we're going by at least without major hurricane impacts across the U.S. so far. We still have time, and there are a couple indications there could be some storms out there. We'll continue to watch as well.
All right. Thank you, sir. Rick Reichmuth. In the meantime, because all this is happening so fast and essentially all at the same time, and because the House is in session tomorrow, and because this storm isn't going anywhere and easing down anytime soon, we're in session with a special Cost of Freedom kicking off at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. We've got Republican Senator Mike Lee joining us, Democratic Congressman Sheila Jackson Lee, the former Treasury Secretary of the United States, John Snow, Dick Armey, remember him? He was at the epicenter of the last government shutdown. He has an idea how he can get out of this one, just like Bill Clinton and Republicans did that time. Many, many more. You're not going to want to miss a minute of it. We've got your back. We've got your money.